In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
You're like, what gives you the right to talk with authority about anything? Well, I'm saying I got like a 99% citizen approval rating in the SimCity Build It for my tablet. So, like, that's what I'm talking about. So today we're going to be talking about alien skies. When I was a kid, I was in middle school, and I read this book called Worlds in Collision. When I was in middle school, I read this book called Worlds in Collision by a guy named Immanuel Velikofsky, and I've always been fascinated by the ideas that he set forth, and like just something about the idea of like, you know, like ancient man looking up at like a sky that's like vastly different or whatever. So we're gonna get into like two kinds of theories. We're gonna talk first about Velikovsky's some of his theories, especially he wrote a couple books, but we're just gonna talk about the Worlds in Collision one. So who is Immanuel Velikofsky? You might ask. He was born in the late 1800s, 1895, I think. He was a Russian Jew, medical doctor. He practiced medicine in Palestine for a while, and then he went to Vienna and he studied psychoanalysis under Jung. And then he moved to New York. He settled down in Jersey, and he taught at Princeton. It's always nicer to say Princeton than New Jersey for some reason. I'm sure Princeton University probably thinks so too. Anyhow, Velikovsky and Einstein were contemporaries. They knew each other. Einstein did not agree with the stuff that Velikovsky was publishing. He originally started publishing this stuff about worlds in collision and ancient cataclysms and stuff like in the 50s. Einstein, he wasn't all about it. But when they would get together, they would talk about it. They worked together to set up some kind of Israeli school. I don't know really a whole lot about that. Velikofsky started the way he got put upon this path of studying this weird high strangeness in the skies above by studying. He wanted to study a Jungian hero. He was looking at the story of Moses and the Exodus, which also you can find information on the Exodus in the book The Ages by me. It's on Amazon. I'll get more into that later. All this stuff I used because the Ages, this basically spans all of history. So a lot of the stuff from that we're going to talk about tonight, a lot of this ancient sky stuff, I use in all the pre-flood stories of the graphic novel. So maybe I'll talk a little bit more about it. I don't want to dwell on it though, because this guy is so interesting. And when you hear there's a couple documentaries, like there's a BBC documentary, I think. But when you hear him talking and they talk to like people, like other scientific people, they're like, Velikofsky was magnificent. He was wrong, but he was magnificently wrong. So, but he was able to, using his model, he was able to make some predictions that wound up being right. So there's a hope out there that, shit was fucked up in outer space a long time ago. Okay, so the whole thing started with him studying Moses and the Exodus. But what he was doing is he was studying it from the other side. He was studying it from the Egyptian side. And he was like, if I could find some kind of correlating story, in these dusty old, hieroglyphs or, tattooed on the walls of wherever, then I can try to like bounce off and get like a time estimate or whatever. And so he found something. He was digging around in Egyptian text, and he found a correlation in I don't have it in my notes, but it's about the Pharaoh sending his men into the void of the Red Sea or something like it. It was something like that. It seemed cryptic and maybe a little bit of a jump for me, but it was enough for good old Velikofsky. So he started going down these deep thought exercises, like, well, what would make the pillar in the sky that the Jews were following, Hebrews at the time? I'm sorry, they weren't Jews until later. But what would make the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire that the Hebrews were following in their Exodus, and what would produce the manna in the desert that would feed them? And so it sounds to me like he believes in God, but he's looking for answers for these miracles that from the Bible. So he started developing this idea, this worlds in collision idea. And the theme for the evening is going to be the sky was not always as orderly or clockwork-like as they are now, or predictable. As a matter of fact, they're amazingly terrifying. They're probably the most terrifying thing that's ever happened that ancient mankind or modern mankind would have ever witnessed. So his idea shakes down a little bit like this, and also when we get to the flip side, the second theory, the electric universe model theory that we're going to be talking about, it's a little weird. So you guys are gonna have to use, your imaginations, because I'm going to be talking about basically the schematic of how our solar system was laid out differently, in various things. And Velikofsky, I gotta tell you, so his idea was that the this thing is actually pretty new. He's only talking about like 4,000 years ago, so it was kind of like in the cusp of actual history, not so much prehistory, which is a part that was amazing to me. I thought that this would be like something that we've been dragging around with us since like caveman days or something, but his thing is like it's definitely within the age of the Torah. I'm sorry, man, my throat's dry. Here, let me see if that does better for you guys. All right, so the Velikofsky's model of the universe, this is the pre-cataclysm model, is the sun's in the middle. That part probably never changes. And in orbit around the sun is the Earth. That's us, that's the Earth. And around the Earth is the moon. And then the second orbit around the sun is Mars, and around Mars is its two moons, Phobos and Deimos. And then the third orbit around the sun is Jupiter. So we're looking at like the sun, Earth, Mars, Jupiter. So Velikofsky's big idea is that where that red hole is Jupiter? That red hole wasn't always there. As a matter of fact, this is the origin of the mysterious red eye of Jupiter. Is that something happened to Jupiter, an exoplanet hit it. Maybe that would have been Saturn. I don't know. I don't know where Saturn is in this Velikofsky model. So just for the sake of this poorly researched talk, we'll just say an event happens to Jupiter, which the outcome is out of this giant red eye smashes a comet. So it's basically Jupiter is giving birth to this comet. A comet vomits forth out of the red eye of Jupiter. And this comet is actually it's actually what is going to become known as Venus. This was Venus, and every time I say Venus, I have to go Venus, like Lady Gaga. So this comet zooms around halfway through the orbit of Jupiter and around the sun, and it comes dangerously close to smashing into Mars. And Velikofsky posits that this is where I'm talking about, like, you could have gave that shit, if you were standing on Mars, you could have gave that shit a high five. Like, that's how close it was. Because this is, Velikofsky posits, this is where Venus swoops by and, like, steals, like, 90% of Mars' atmosphere. So this is, like, when people talk about, like, water on Mars and where it went. This is what he's saying. Like, Venus took that shit, fucking jacked Mars for its water. And then it continued its rotation, and it spun by Earth, almost crashing into Earth, throwing Earth's orbit out of place, and then finally resting into orbit closer to Earth. And I guess maybe one of these near collisions drew enough whatever to create Mercury. I don't exactly know where Mercury is in Velikofsky's model. Maybe it's there, maybe it's whatever, but the cataclysms of it smashing and almost smashing into these planets, Velikofsky, he describes it as like hail and fiery lightning slag is just flying out of the sky, atmospheres boiling, and the sky being darkened with debris, and like the only thing left are these poor humans who have no idea what they just witnessed the craziest thing that's ever gonna fucking happen in anyone's lifetime, and they're just left to like just breathe in the dust and look at the sky and see like these different like planets super close smashing into each other. It's like a giant, like kind of like billiard table. And that right there, what I just described, is the whole inspiration for me putting it into my book, because I have this great The cover of the book is actually the antagonist standing there looking at the sky while these planets are like slamming together and stuff. And I've been carrying that image around in my head since middle school. I finally got a place to fucking use it. Yeah, so it smashes through, and like the planets finally become rested. So some of the things that Velikofsky was able to predict that actually came true is he was saying, well, in my model, Mercury or Venus is still brand new. So it's going to be way hotter. Before, like, everyone's idea was that Venus was kind of like going to be like a twin of Earth in some ways, and a lot of the ways that they were talking about is like its temperature was formed around the same time. It's got its time to cool its jets off a little bit. But whenever they were finally able to get temperature readings from Venus, he was like, it's going to be like 600 degrees. And everyone's like, you're crazy, you old Russian Jew. And whenever they were finally able to get the temperature of Venus, they found it was like 400. The first time they did it, and then they were like, wait, test that again? That's crazy. They tested it, and it was even higher, and it was at 600 degrees. And the other thing that Velikofsky said, is he was like, what, you want me to prove this shit? You want to prove this shit? Point a radio telescope up to Jupiter. Because it's still reeling from all this shit that's been done to it that made it like vomit out this comet. Like, it's going to be super active. It's going to be throwing radio waves out everywhere. And everyone's like, okay, Velikofsky, you're crazy. But I can't remember what the catalyst was, but he was talking to Einstein. It might have been this Venus thing. And, Einstein was like, okay, well, let's just point the radio telescope at Jupiter for this guy. Let's just see what he says. And, he actually, it does. It was popping with radio waves. And, Einstein actually had like his official secretary write like some kind of like validating memo about Velikofsky's work. And the rumor around town is when they found Einstein dead, on his book was Velikofsky's first book, Worlds in Collision, opened and like sit down on his desk. So maybe, given a little bit more time, maybe Einstein would have came around to this crazy idea. But if we're going to talk about crazy ideas, the next one is even crazier than this. This is like just a little pinball game. This is just a little pool game. Billiards, if you will, in the ancient sky compared to what I got coming up next. So I'm going to take a break. I'll probably refill my drink here, and then we're going to get back and we're going to talk about the electric universe model as presented by the Thunderbolts Project. And if you guys want to find some Velikofsky stuff, you can definitely find a couple good documentaries on YouTube. If you just type in Worlds of Collision, you can find it. You know what you're doing. Sorry, I'm having such a problem. All right, so I'm John Towers. This is the Abercast. We're an indie comic book company. We deal with stories that have to do with the paranormal, the divine, the heretical, the conspiratorial, and history. So we're going to get into this thing called the Electric Universe Model, and it's presented by this group of dudes called the Thunderbolt Project. And I would suggest, it used to be when I was single and I couldn't get to sleep, I would put on these Joe Campbell lectures from the Hero with Many Faces, like lecture series or whatever, and listen to old Uncle Joe for a little bit. I would wind up zonking out. not to say he's boring, just there's something like grandfatherly and soothing about his voice that, did it for me. This guy that that does all the Thunderbolt Projects videos on YouTube, this guy has Uncle Joe Campbell beat 100%. His name's Dave Talbot. I'm not saying it's boring. I'm just saying there's just something about his voice that will put you to fucking sleep. So he is a author, like in the 70s. He wrote this book called The Saturn Myth, which is kind of like what all this is built on. But we got to get into some nerdy science stuff here for a minute. But the cool planet configuration thing is the takeaway. That's the most interesting part for me. However, the nerdy planet stuff is the thing that you guys have to understand is that these electric universe guys believe that gravity is not the most important force in the universe. Electricity is. They think that the electricity it's kind of like the force. It binds us. It moves through us, and all this kind of stuff. Like static electricity is like the main bullshit for them. And we're going to get into it because we're going to talk a lot about plasma discharges. So it sounds provocative. In the videos that they talk about, he calls it ejecta sometimes, which sounds really fucking dirty to me. Anyhow, so electricity is what's stringing together the universe. They believe that looking at myths and the ancient cultures from all over the world, that they see these repeating symbols and themes like a star and a crescent, or like a flare and all this all these kind of things. Like I said, the same disclaimer goes to this side of the track too, guys, because a lot of this stuff is visual. So listen to me bumble my way around it isn't probably the easiest thing. But looking at the same cultural or I should say fingerprints of the events in different in interlaced in the different cultures all the way around the world is kind of like what led this guy David Talbot to this huge gigantic thing, concept and theory. And he's like this mythicist or mythologist. Yeah, mythologist. He's a mythologist, and he was all hung up on these similar petroglyphs from all over the world. And one day he met this guy named Wal Thornhill, and Wal Thornhill is a plasma scientist. He's some kind of scientist that understands plasma discharges. And so Talbot was showing Wal Thornhill these different shapes all around the world. One of them is a little man spread akimbo with two dots on either side of his hips. And Wal Thornhill was like, oh, I know that shape. I can produce that in my plasma laboratory. And then they would do a spiral. He would show him a spiral, and Wal Thornhill was like, I could totally generate that spiral in my plasma laboratory. And he would show him another thing, like a Gnostic cross, or like a flare with an eye in the middle of it or whatever. And Wal Thornhill was like, I can do that in my plasma laboratory. So this whole thing is kind of if you understand that plasma is scalable. You could do a same little tiny plasma shape, and it's just a vector graphic. You could stretch it out across the whole planet and reaching up to a next planet, and it would still hold its same dimensions and visual properties or whatever. And then you could just scale it back down to your little plasma laboratory again. So that's kind of the crux of all this thing. Yeah, so they were able to compare these plasma charges, or these plasma discharges, these ejecta, and compare them with these petroglyphs that Talbot was looking at. And they could replicate these shapes in the lab. So this led them to believe, or to develop this idea that the prior to the modern or present configuration of our solar system, there was a vast, different, and frankly weirder configuration of the planet. So this is where you guys have to use your mind's eye. You have to give me control, and I'll explain what's going on to you. So think about a single string or cable coming down, holding at the very end of it is Earth. Okay, so Earth is at the very end of the string, and then if you go up, the next, I gotta do it backwards. Okay, hold on, forget everything I just said. So there's a string, and at the top of the string is this huge yellow gas giant of a planet. And this is the prehistorical ringless Saturn. And it's Saturn was also named Helios back in the day, which is weird because that's the sun. So our sun almost has very little to do with the sun that we know now. So there's basically two suns in the sky. Think about it this way. But this one was the main motherfucker because it was the closest. It was literally right there. So it's this big yellow, it's this dim yellow sun just giving off this boring, just this dim, piss yellow light. Okay, then the next planet down, right below this ringless Saturn, is Venus. But it's not like Venus that we know now, not like we know now. Right now, what it's doing is it's giving off this wild ejecta or plasma charge, in all these different directions. It's like, in the when you used to go to Spencer's Gifts and they had the ball with electrical bits sparking off the middle side, and you could put your hand on it and it would create a strong arc to your hand. That's plasma. This is what we're talking about. And that's kind of what Venus was doing. And then right after Venus was the little red Mars. And it's all hanging down from this one cable, those three planets in that configuration. And then at the end was Earth. Now, they call this configuration the polar configuration, because Earth only spun around on one pole at this time. It rotated on a single axis. And I'm guessing it wasn't the wobbly axis that we have now. I'm guessing it was right, straight up. Like that Paula Abdul song. Okay, so there we have it. So going back the natural way, there's Earth. And then very close to it was Mars, then this plasma discharging Venus, and then after that was this gas giant, this piss yellow gas giant Saturn. So if you're standing on Earth looking up at this polar configuration, it looks like a giant eye just staring down at you. With this crazy discharging popping off, and then this red eye just staring at you, and then the yellow gas giant part would be the rest of the eye. So the way that I did it in the comic book was instead is I looked at the old Voyager, I think it's Voyager, that took the pictures of the poles of Saturn, and Saturn now with the rings and everything, it has this wild hexagon and then triangle and then eye thing right on the South Pole. When I think about it, it kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. But I just pulled Saturn in close instead of trying to get in. Besides trying to explain all of this nonsense, not that it's nonsense, but all this stuff in a comic book, I just used Saturn as this avatar of God that's in a geosynchronous orbit above the Garden of Eden, just staring down with this fucking unblinking judgmental eye at you. But in the Electric Universe model, that's basically what this thing is. And the way that the planets travel, or the way that you're perceiving it, they will create different shapes in the sky. And these shapes that are in the sky refer to, different like Venus, coming out of like the clamshell, like however you perceive it. In some ways, like the Venus plasma discharge would look like a clamshell. Or, like, if you're talking about, like, Saturn, here's the interesting thing. Like, why is, like, these far-off distant planets, like, so important to ancient mythology? Because it's like, when you look at Saturn now, or even, like, if you're, like, an ancient astronomer, and you're looking at Saturn, you can't tell that it's got rings. So where does it get, like, the, like, Saturn and Kronos, like, where do they get the ideas for, like, their mythology? Like, why does Saturn, why is there a Scythe? You can't get any of that, like, tertiary information from looking at the, like, little pinky red dot in the sky, like in the case of Mars, or like, if it was Saturn, like, you can't. Where is that coming from? Like, where's the Scythe thing coming from? And, like, where's the bit about, like, how he eats its kids and all this wild things? Like, how do you, like, explain that? With David Talbot, he goes a long ways by saying, like, modern, mythologists or, astronomers, if they ask these questions of the modern sky, the answers buckle under its weight. Like, they don't make any sense at all. So, but if you are looking at, like, this polar configuration, and you're looking at, like, where the sun that we have now is, like, casting light on this giant gas giant, when it's tilted, how it looks like a gigantic bowl, or it looks like a scythe, or it looks like, it looks like a crescent, framing a star, like it's the sign of, like, Islam or something. So I highly recommend, if you go to Project Thunderbolts on YouTube, like, they have 3 documentaries that are like 3 hours, and it's, like I said, get some Mountain Dew if you're gonna get some Mountain Dew if you're gonna watch them. And then they have also, like, 50 episodes of, like, discourses on an alien sky, where they have, like, these 5 to 7 minute, like, just clips of, like, where they're talking about this stuff. And whether you buy it or not, it's super interesting. To me, I live in my imagination a lot, and I would just love just to walk out of my door and just see this polar configuration just staring down at me. Like, I would literally piss myself. These giant, like, God planets staring, like, just peering in, like, on you, unblinking, judgmental, God planets. But the ideas are also, once this polar configuration started to unravel, these plasma shots would, like, fly everywhere through the sky, making these plasma configurations, or plasma ejecta, all over the sky for the whole world to see. And people would, like, clip them into rock art, and they would try to preserve all this wild, crazy lightning bolt shit that they would see in the sky, and this is kind of like where this whole thing picked off from, is him looking at, like, all these different shapes that were the same but just a little bit different, and all these different, pressed into all these different cultures, like, around the world. So eventually this polar configuration unraveled, and when it did, like, all these, like, all the different, like, plasma bolts and stuff would arc through the sky and, like, start connecting these, like a spider web, just connecting these planets. And, like, so when you go and they send a satellite, they take pictures of Mars, and you see, like, Mars, and there you could look at it and you could be like, wow, man, like, that makes, like, the Grand Canyon look like a mud puddle. And no one can figure out what, like, carved these mountain ranges and like these different, like, valleys and stuff. So these Project Thunderbolt guys are like, that is a scar from Venus, from a plasma bolt from Venus to Mars. An act, just think of like the widest angle, like Michael Bay fucking frame that you can think of. And it's just, all it is just a plasma bolt from the next planet arcing through space and just drilling into Mars and like creating this gnarly welder, like as if you took a gigantic like arc welder and just like ripped it across the planet. And then, so they take these iron plates and they actually like arc weld them, and then you microscope it and you can actually look, and it looks just like these ridges on Mars. It's bananas. And the imagined potential of a plasma bolt arcing from planet to planet, to me, it gets me hard, bros. Like that is an awesome, visual, I think. I mean, I don't know how you could say it's not, but I mean, just the idea, like something of that. And so like when this configuration starts unraveling, and all the planets are kind of going their own separate ways, and all these like plasma bolts are going everywhere. This is where like the gods of order that have been in this configuration, or able to come together in this configuration for all this time. This is kind of like where they become, chaos monsters instead of gods. So instead of like Venus, it's like Medusa with all its crazy like plasma stake heads. And that's where like it's been pressed into our kind of subconscious. It's been kind of pressed into our like collective subconscious, about like all these stories. And this half an hour that I did on the Thunderbolts project doesn't do it any justice. If this sparks you guys' interest at all, I highly recommend you go to the Thunderbolt project YouTube page and have a fucking picnic, because they'll talk. That Dave Talbot guy, like I said, first of all, get a fucking kind of Jet Alert, get a couple things of Jet Alert in you, and maybe a Monster Energy drink and some Mountain Dew, and chill out and listen to that guy. But as for now, I am John Towers. I'm currently recording this podcast under a boring, non-alien sky, and like I said, I am the creative for Stigmata Studios. We do comic books that have to do with the paranormal, history, mythology, and conspiracy, whatever else I want to throw in. I should really nail that down and make that like a thing. Anyhow, you can find our comic books anywhere. indieplanet.us is a good place to find the issue size comic books. Amazon.com is a great place to find the graphic novels. Or if you don't remember any of those, or you don't know how to get there, go to stigmatastudios.com. You can find all the comic books and where to buy them right there. Also, if you want to sign into the newsletter, there's a link right there. You can sign in the newsletter, and I send you some free stuff. It used to be every month. Now it's just whenever I get around to it, because I'm a busy motherfucker. And I hope you guys enjoyed this thing about the alien sky. Like I said, when I read Velikofsky in middle school, I became enamored with it. And, parts of it I've been dragging around for obviously over 30 years, because I just put it in my latest graphic novel, which is called The Ages. So I would just want to say,
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm come face to face with an army of magically corrupted machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Oh, it's too loud. Thank you guys for tuning in and spending this whatever episode with me. I appreciate it. You can like and subscribe if you want. If you don't want to, that's fine too. Just tune in next week. I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but it'll be fun. Hey.